If you're watching this video, it's probably because, like me, you're a big fan of the 1984 movie Mermaid Legend. On a recent trip to Japan, I got to visit two of the film's key filming locations, and I just kind of wanted to share what that experience was like with you. I first saw this movie about 15 years ago. At the time, I watched a Japanese copy without subtitles, so it wasn't a movie that I was blown away by on first watch, but after watching it subsequent times, getting the English subbed version and eventually getting a physical copy, I really grew to love this film, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think one of the things that really drew me in is the presence of ama divers. I think I was really intrigued just because I had no clue what Migiwa and the other ama divers in this film were doing. It was just a tradition that I was not familiar with. And after watching some documentaries and reading a little bit about it, I just became very interested. And I learned that one of the key regions where ama diving was practiced was in Mie Prefecture. That's also one of the major locations where this movie was filmed. Not only that, but there's a documented fondness for Mie Prefecture by the film's director, Toshiharu Ikeda. With all that in mind, visiting Mie became something that I really wanted to experience, not specifically to go and try and find the filming locations of this movie, but just to experience the geography, the history, and the tradition of this region. However, thanks to Google Translate, taking screenshots from the film, I was able to track down a couple of filming locations for this movie. One, surprisingly, was not actually in Mie, it was in Chiba, but I'll get into that later. In the movie, Migiwa flees to a place called Watakano Island. Now, what I've learned about Watakano Island is that it has a bit of a dark history. From the period about the 1950s up until as recently as about 2013, it was known as Prostitution Island, where businessmen and sailors would go to partake in the types of activities that its name would suggest. And part of the reason why this was allowed to persist is because of some gray area over who had jurisdiction of the island. Although this dark history isn't explicitly mentioned in the movie, there are a couple of places in the movie where it makes this apparent. When Shohei is helping Migiwa flee or evade the police, he says, "You should go to Watakano Island," for two reasons. One is that there's only women there, and two is that the police don't go there. So this makes perfect sense in the context of what I now know about Watakano Island. A Japanese person watching this film 40 years ago, they would have that context. They would sort of understand and be able to put that together. But myself, that's not something I was able to put together until I learned more about the history of this region. And to me, that just added another layer to this film. But that all brings me to my point, which is I actually had a chance to stay at the Fukujuso Hotel on Watakano Island. To get to the island, I had to take just a short ferry from a ferry terminal that was about a 30 to 40 minute bus ride from the main train station in Shima City. So this is very much accessible through public transit. It wasn't overly difficult to get to. It is a lot of local transit and trains that I had to take, but ultimately I was able to get there without too much problem. Getting to the island was kind of surreal because once I got on the ferry, I realized that I was taking sort of the same path that Migiwa's character took when she was going to Watakano Island. That was kind of just a surreal and fun experience for me. And then, of course, arriving to the island and seeing that this indeed was the backdrop for a number of scenes in the film was very interesting to me. Watakano Island today is 90% abandoned. So what was once a thriving sort of nightlife kind of island with bars, izakayas, snack bars, that kind of thing, is now mostly very quiet. It's essentially a ghost town. I didn't see many people there. A lot of the businesses that I walked by were just shut down, which is really interesting because you could kind of imagine sort of like the ghosts of that time. You can imagine what it would be like during the height of its popularity. But all that is sort of ancient history now. So it does give you that feeling of being in like a liminal space, kind of eerie, but it was really exciting just to be there and experience that. The hotel itself is very much a family-oriented hotel. I believe it's only one of two hotels that is still operating on the island. There is a traditional Japanese onsen there. It is very much a resort-style hotel for families to visit, to do things like fishing, to experience the onsen, and have traditional Japanese meals. Being in the hotel it wasn't exactly apparent to me that this is absolutely where this movie was filmed. I think the hotel has undergone a lot of changes in the 40 years since this movie came out. But I'm also not convinced that a lot of the scenes were filmed in the hotel, with the exception of the banquet scene. When I got to the dining hall, it very much was apparent to me that this is where that banquet scene had been filmed. Beyond that, my room was on the back side of the hotel, so it wasn't overlooking the bay as Migiwa's room was in the film. However, in the morning, I had a peek into the rooms on the other side while they were being cleaned. They were more traditional Japanese style rooms with tatami mats throughout. So that could have been indeed where some of these scenes were filmed, but again, not totally convinced that all of the scenes that take place on Watakano Island were actually filmed there. They have maybe been filmed in other regions of Mie and Shima City. One thing I did notice when I was on Watakano Island and elsewhere in Mie is that the boats had a prefix on them, which was ME, meaning that the boat was registered in Mie. And you can actually see this prefix on boats throughout Mermaid Legend. So while I was there, I was taking photos on my iPhone to see if I could match up the numbers, but I didn't find the exact boats that were in the film, but it was still kind of a fun exercise. So my time on Watakano Island was short, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. It was a very last minute idea for me to go there while I was in Mie, but I hope to go back one day. It's just so interesting, and again, just knowing the history adds that extra layer of interest. So this gets to the next part of my trip. What I learned about Mermaid Legend is that while it's set in Mie, it wasn't exclusively filmed there. And one of the key filming locations, which is the nuclear facility, isn't a nuclear facility at all. It's actually the Katsura Underwater Marine Park. So this is located in Katsura, Chiba, which is a little bit closer to Tokyo. I guess it would be east of Tokyo. I think you can get there in about an hour and a half by train. And then once you're in Katsura, it would be another 30 or 40 minutes by local bus to get to the marine park. But even when you get off at the train station in Katsura, they actually have a big model of the marine park. So obviously it's something that has been part of the local identity there. Once I arrived in Katsura, I started to wonder if other parts of the film had been filmed there, because the landscape here was a little bit more recognizable compared to what I had seen in the movie. So I did try and look for some other filming locations, particularly fishing ports. There was a couple of fishing ports in Katsura that looked a lot like the fishing port, one of the introductory scenes in the movie. However, there was one key feature that was missing, which was the red lighthouse. So you can see a red lighthouse in the background, which wasn't near any of the fishing ports that I saw in Katsura, although they're not uncommon in Japan. In fact, there was also a red lighthouse on Watakano Island, which is visible in the movie, and I also saw when I was there. So one of the ways I was able to verify that this was filmed in Chiba is that in one of the shots, you can actually see CB on one of the boats, which means that that boat is registered in Chiba Prefecture, not in Mie. And it seems like there would be no other reason for that prefix to be on the boat other than if the scene was in fact filmed in Chiba. However, later in the film, we see a very similar scene, but we then see the ME prefix on the boat. So I was thinking maybe they realized that there was a mistake there, and for the subsequent scenes, they put the Mie prefix on the boat to fix it. However, I also noticed something interesting in this scene. While you can see the marine park in the background, if you look closely, you can actually see some ghosting where you can see parts of the marine park through the mast of the boat. So I'm actually thinking that this could be a composite shot. I don't know enough about filmmaking to know why that ghosting would be there otherwise, but I think that this is a composite shot, which would lend to the idea that this shot was in fact in Mie and not Chiba. And that could also suggest that most of this movie was filmed in Mie, other than parts that exclusively feature the marine park. So I ended up staying in Katsura for a couple of nights, and honestly, it was a beautiful town. The people were very warm. were really excited to chat with me, and I would recommend visiting for anyone that's looking for interesting places to travel in Japan. And Mie as well. I think Mie is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I'm dying to go back to Mie. It's quite big, so there's a lot to see and do there. Both of these places are off the typical sort of beaten path for tourists, so you can expect a much more local experience. And that could also be a little bit more challenging logistically to visit these places, but both of these places are incredible and highly recommend them. If you've identified any filming locations from this movie yourself, whether you're local to Japan or visiting, please let me know. I'd love to continue to try and track down some of the filming locations that I wasn't able to this time. I'm definitely going to go back to Mie and perhaps Chiba as well in the future. Thanks for watching. If you do want to talk about this movie, feel free to hit me up on Instagram. I'd love to chat and just nerd about this movie, and as well as Mie and Chiba. So thanks for watching.